Hey guys, Scott back with a new beer talk for you. I call them general beer talks, casual kind of beer talks. I'm gonna try to keep these a little shorter than my beer dissection and what is style beers. I have a couple of bullet points on a small piece of paper here, which my what is styles, I usually have a sheet to try to hit a million bullet points to go over the history and things. This one I'm just trying to keep it kind of short and sweet. I know I've talked about it in my beer dissection videos. I may even have a standalone video about some terminology and things at your local brew pub, brewery, craft brewery. Sometimes it's listed on the can. So I wanted to go over a few things and some other terms you may hear used either in my videos, other beer videos. If you're drinking a beer with the brewer at your local, home brewer, or not home brewery, but your craft brewery. So things like beer label terms and things like that. So one of the first things I want you to understand, obviously ABV percentage is the easy one, right? That's the alcohol by volume percentage. And you've seen it in beers and everything. Sometimes it's a competition. Oh, I got an 8% beer. I got a 9%, 9.2, 9.3, whatever it may be. It could be 4.3. Now, how is that determined? When brewers make the beer and they form this sugary syrup called wort, okay, spelled W-O-R-T, even though we pronounce it wort. Okay, those are going to be the dissolved sugars in the beer. And I'm not going to go through the whole process, how they get to that. Well, they'll take a hydrometer, which is this, and I think I've had a picture on one of my videos before of it, and it checks the specific gravity of the fluid. Well, when they put in the fermenter and they pitch the yeast, and the yeast are eating up all the sugars, at the very end, we'll call it final gravity. And they'll take another reading at the very end when they think fermentation is done. And usually it's a lower number. And that difference from original gravity to final gravity, they will calculate the ABV percentage of the beer. Okay, so obviously a beer like an Imperial Stout, that's at 10, 12% or anything with Imperial. And I should just mention, if you see the term Imperial on your cans, your bottles, okay, whether it's Imperial Stout, I just had an Imperial Blonde Ale, I think it was infused with mango recently at Great South Bay Brewing Company. Usually means higher alcoholic strength because blonde ales are usually roughly 4.5 to 5.5. This one was at like 9%. So if you see the term Imperial, so they calculate the ABV percentage by the starting gravity versus the final gravity. So you may see those terms OG, original gravity, with a period, and FG on your board up there. And again, I know I've addressed this in a standalone video once. I've talked about it. But some of these questions have come to me via some direct messaging. So what happens too is you also see IBUs, which is International Bitterness Units. And I've used that in all my videos. And beers can be as low as 30 IBUs or as high as 70 to 100 IBUs. We usually don't perceive anything over 100 IBUs differently than, so if you had something that was 150 versus 100, not a big deal. But it does contribute to what we could have perceived bitterness and or perceived sweetness. Because what happens is when that brewer has that sweet, syrupy wort again, and we're putting the yeast in there, the yeast are going to start chopping away at those sugars. Now, if they chop away a lot of the sugars, okay, and they make the beer what we call drier, okay, like a Belgian Golden Strong, like a Duvel, okay, we say the beer is highly attenuated, okay, that's another term you may have seen before or heard before, maybe even I've used in a lot of my videos. It's eating a lot of sugar, so there's not as much residual sweetness to the beer, okay? So we have perceived, the perceived sweetness there. It's either a drier beer, or if the yeast isn't as attenuated, or the beer is as attenuated because the yeast may be left behind a lot of sugars, we perceive the beer to be a little sweeter. Now, the IBU number, when it balances out with that sweetness, will give us that perceived bitterness, okay? Okay, a lot of times in a balanced beer, you want some bitterness to balance that sweetness because you don't want the beer cloyingly sweet. So you may have heard me use these terms in my videos before. If you're at your local brewery, you may have talked to the brewer about it. You may watch other beer tubers like myself and get the same thing. So those are, how the ABV percentage is calculated by original and final gravity. And some of the boards at these breweries, in an earlier video, I actually think showed you in a couple examples, because, brewers are beer geeks, right? So they like the numbers and they need the numbers for their packaging, and they need to advertise to the consumer certain things. Other things you may talk about is, beers being hazy, right? Now we know beers like New England IPAs, we call them hazies and juicies because they're very cloudy, they are very opaque-like. And that usually comes, and you've heard me say in my videos, a lot of times the copious amounts of hops are used, hop matter, the polyphenols from the hops create the haziness. Sometimes they use oats in the grist, which is all the grains, like the recipe of grains, or wheat, and it has more protein content, and it creates that haziness that you see. You also get haziness sometimes with certain styles of yeast, right? Sometimes the Hefeweizen yeast used in Weiss beer in Germany or locally, the yeast won't flocculate. During fermentation, the yeast is supposed to fall to the bottom and they'll stay in suspension a little bit. That will create some haziness. Now, if it's not sometimes a beer that you don't want hazy or you don't expect to be hazy, sometimes we'll use a term chill haze. The beer's somewhat cold, maybe just below refrigerated temperature, and you look at your beer and it's not a juicy, it's not a hazy, it's not a Hefeweizen, and it has that very subtle cloudiness to it, right? Well, there's still sometimes proteins from the grains and everything floating in there. And, even though a lot of brewers may use finings, which clear the beer out a little bit, or they'll cold crash it, meaning that they'll lower the temperature of the beer, and the hazy components, or some of them will drop to the bottom. But sometimes, even if they drop a lot, you chill the beer, and whether it's in a keg or whether it's in a bottle or a can, you pour it in your glass, you'll see this little haze there. And we call it chill haze. It happens very frequently, whether it's home brewing or in craft beer. I don't usually, other than maybe some certain German styles, I don't, rank a beer lower because of it. It's just so common. It's so hard to get rid of 100% of it. But again, you will see haze because of that, okay? And then we call that chill haze. So some beers are intended to be hazy, like some of your juicies, New England IPAs, and some beers are not, but there is a little bit of haze, the freshness of the beer, the proteins from the beer. Some of the brewers, they're not filtering the beers at a lot of your local breweries, which is not a knock to the brewery. It's just not practical and sometimes not really necessary, like you would, like a Budweiser would do, or even Sam Adams would do. A lot of times they'll probably filtering the beer, or they're using fining agents at the end of the brewing process to drop all that little particulate, so it's a little bit clearer, sparkling beer. So that's that. So that was pretty much what I want to just go over, some terms there, guys, from your board, and sometimes on the bottle. Oh, one other thing is you may see a term SRM. SRM as in Mary, okay? Standard reference method. You'll see it up on your board too, and it ranges usually from 1-2, which is like a straw color, 6 to 9, could be more like, amber, 14 copper, get up to 30, 40, get to brown ale stage, porters and stouts up around 40 to brown and black. So if you see SRM, standard reference method, I know I've talked about this in one of my early videos when I started this channel, but I just wanted to bring some of that up because I did get a few messages about certain terms with that. Okay, so pretty much that's all I wanted to cover in this video, guys. Till my next beer video, whether it's a beer dissection face-off or a general beer talk, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.